Welcome to Season 5 of the Manufacturers Network. Real talk with the people building what's next in manufacturing. And now your host, Lisa Ryan.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. Excited to introduce our guest today, Phil Rees. Phil has spent more than 2 decades helping companies optimize their supply chains, fulfillment strategies, and global logistics. As founder of ShipMax, he works with manufacturers and growing brands to solve the challenges that happen after a product leaves the factory, from warehousing to international distribution. So, Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. It's great to be on with you, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today.
All right. Share with us a little bit about your background and what led you to doing what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said in your little preamble at the beginning there, I've been in logistics and supply chain roles for just coming up to 21 years. Started out that journey, I guess a lot of people, just a junior sales guy on the road for different logistics and parcel-based businesses back then. Gradually worked my way up the corporate ladder to 2023, where I was the commercial director of a fairly good-sized courier company based at Heathrow over here in the UK. And within that role, I wore many hats within the business, but one of them was that I developed a fulfillment and pick and pack operation as a new service for that business. So we acquired a warehouse in the UK, and I was tasked with the project of putting the software systems in there, building the team, and filling it up with customers. So I won't give you all the boring early stages of the career, but I'm in my mid-40s, and having worked in business development, sales, and commercial roles throughout my entire working career, I always had, I think, an entrepreneurial spirit and an entrepreneurial attitude to life, but felt towards the latter stages of my career that there was a number of things going on. One was that I had a desire to build something of my own rather than helping other people build their things. So I'm a late starter on the entrepreneurial journey. I was in my mid-40s before I founded ShipMax. And yeah, just family reasons as well. When I worked for my former employer, I live in Swansea in South Wales. That's about 3.5 to 4 hours drive from Heathrow. And the warehouse operation that I mentioned, that was in the Midlands, not a million miles from Birmingham, in a place called Coventry. And I was typically 2, 3, sometimes even 4 nights a week in a hotel, week in, week out, for 15 years. I have a wife and 3 children who've always been in Swansea throughout that entire period. And as my kids are getting older, my eldest is nearly 18, I just felt like I probably had another maybe 10 years, if I'm lucky, of the kids being at home with us. So I just felt like it was the right time to A, take that leap of faith into bootstrapping a business, and B, also a really good time to adjust the work ratio to home life a little bit, just to ensure that I didn't miss those last kind of years of being at home with them a bit more. So yeah, there were a number of factors at play, but those are probably the 2 biggest ones.
Yeah, it's funny, the decisions we make in our lives and the reason that we make them. But the one thing that I have to say, as far as your sales background and then being an entrepreneur, that will help you more than probably anything. Because there's so many times people are an entrepreneur because they have a great idea, they have a great product, they have something, but they don't know how to sell it, and they don't want to pick up the phone, and they don't want to reach out to people. It's like, sorry, you're not going to do very well. So you're off to a good start that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. Most of certainly the last decade of the workers, and even probably a bit longer than that, has been primarily focused on working with online retail businesses. And what I've observed through working with certainly hundreds, possibly thousands of these businesses with different hats on over the years is that if you're a retail brand, whether it's a early stage startup or even a more established retailer, the two things that retailers like to focus on is their product and how they're going to market the product. And often supply chain is a little bit of an afterthought, I think. Yet these businesses are very much supply chain through and through. And it's not as sexy maybe as the digital marketing side or the merchandising side with the grey-haired old man in the background that makes sure things clear customs and end up where they need to be when they need to be there. But at the same time, in most online retail businesses, particularly direct-to-consumer businesses, it's usually the second biggest area of cost behind the product itself. So I'm totally with you there. I think being able to both sell myself personally, but also sell ShipMax is definitely a little bit of a superpower when you're bootstrapping a business from zero with ambitious growth plans.
Yeah. And you work with, I know you do a lot of online with retail, but also with the manufacturers. And because the show is focused on that, we'll stick with that. But manufacturers do spend a lot of time improving production efficiency. But what are the biggest logistics mistakes after products are leaving the factory?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say at ShipMax, we try to touch all elements of the supply chain and try and provide helpful advice all the way through that life cycle. So the earliest stage that we get involved in any discussions is we have a number of overseas sourcing partners who help brands and retailers find good factories to work with. But I would say probably with the way that the lens that we have over the industry, it's usually around how the goods are going to be imported from the country of origin into the destination country. So if we look, for example, at HS codes, harmonization codes, HTS codes, as they're often referred to, that coding of the product is absolutely crucial to how it clears customs, both in terms of whether it clears customs smoothly and efficiently, but also how much tax it attracts when it crosses the border from where it's being shipped from and to. And I think one of the common misconceptions is that the HS code itself, whilst it's a standardized system, each importing country or importing destination has their own interpretation of the HS codes. So if I'm importing, let's say, I don't know, hoodies from a factory in China, normally what will happen is the commercial invoice will get raised by the factory. It depends on what Incoterms are being used to get it from the factory to the warehouse where it's going to end up. But HS codes are quite nuanced. And if I'm importing those hoodies into, let's say, Europe, the UK, and the US, so there's 3 consignments leaving the factory overseas to be imported into 3 different destination countries, I might need 3 slightly different variations of the HS code for those 3 markets. So I think one mistake that brands and retailers make is they allow the factory themselves to determine which HS code the product is going to move with in its documentation. And we're based in the UK. We're a small island. We're nowhere near as big as you guys in the US. We don't import anything like as much product. One of the things I've seen over the years, often, many times in this, is that, let's say it's a Chinese factory that are producing the goods. They'll give the HS code that they know works great for the US, and then they won't necessarily drill down into the detail to look at whether that is actually the best HS code for a UK import or for a European import or for an Australian import, let's say, because they just want to get it off their loading bay and into the container or up into the air as quickly as possible. It's always worth a retailer who are importing from an overseas manufacturer not just looking at, because sometimes that's the right HS code and it might actually be the correct HS code in all 3 places, but that depends entirely on the product, its composition, what the local regulations look like, and how US customs import or the preferred HS code for a US customs import might not be what's preferred by Border Force in the UK or by the European Commission, let's say. So that's probably the one that I've come across the most over the years.
And you probably talked about this a little bit, but as many manufacturers are looking at reshoring, nearshoring, and expanding into new markets, how has that changed the way companies should think about their distribution strategy? Is there anything else besides the HS codes?
I think a good rule of thumb is that you want to look firstly at whether there are any trade deals between the two countries that you can take advantage of. For example, there is a trade deal that exists between the UK and the US, which was signed between Keir Starmer and President Trump. Now, one of the mistakes that retailers look at is they'll think that trade deal is applicable to them, but the key piece of information is the country of origin. If I'm a UK retailer and I'm selling to the US, if I'm selling Scotch whiskey or Welsh cheese or something that's wholly manufactured in the UK, it could be a Jaguar Land Rover car even. If that thing is manufactured in the UK, then I will benefit from the trade deal that exists between the UK and the US. But if that car is a car that I've imported from somewhere else and the country of origin isn't the UK, then it's not then considered to be covered within that trade deal. So there's a lot of nuance around rules of origin. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that often gets thought about when the mistake's been made reactively rather than upfront proactively. These are the sort of conversations that we often get into, is about, okay, let's try and optimize from day one rather than react later on. So that's one area. I think another really good rule of principle is to try and clear customs as fewer times as possible within your supply chain. If, let's say, you're based in Australia, then you don't necessarily want to import a product from China to Australia to then re-export that back out to the US consumer, because you're clearing two customs borders, one into Australia and then one into the US. So we're always looking at the supply chain to see, are there any unnecessary border crossings within this supply chain that, with a slightly different plan or a different way of executing, we can minimize the border crossing. Because every time you cross a customs border, you're going to incur cost. Even if it's a duty-free import, there's often a sales tax to be paid unless you import it into a free zone. Or there's the consideration of the distance as well. Can you find an equivalent product at an equivalent price that's nearer to you? I think we'd all like to see the businesses that we buy from on a regular basis sourcing their products and services more locally. That's what sits behind Mr. Trump and the introduction of tariffs and removal of de minimis thresholds. It's because so much product was flowing in from China and from other markets into the US market is ultimately hindering US-based manufacturing by people not ordering from US-based manufacturers. So yeah, it's a big question, very broad one. I think without a sort of specific use case or example, it's a tough one to answer because there's gray areas and nuance within that question, I think. But yeah, try and clear customs as fewer times as possible and try and source your product as close to where it's going to be sold as is possible as well.
But it seems like one of the things that can really help is AI, because of course it's showing up everywhere in manufacturing. Yeah. Where are you seeing AI make the biggest impact in warehousing, fulfillment, and supply chain operations? And then are there areas where it's still just mostly hype?
Wow, again, that's a big question, Lisa. I'm going to give a bit of a confession at this stage, and I think this is potentially something you and I have in common. I'm an AI nut, right? My business would not have grown as quickly as it has and been as successful as it has over the last 3 years had I not had the productivity gains that I've been able to leverage through not only making use of these tools, but obsessing over the latest developments and following interesting creators who are 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of where we are. So we don't have the guardrails around our business that a much larger corporate business might have. Our office is based in Swansea. We're within Swansea University's campus, and we're constantly wowing the computer science department of Swansea University with the things that we're doing with AI, because they can't play with it in the way that we can. For their IT infrastructure is such that they can only really operate on Microsoft-based technologies. So that really limits them, because they're nervous about using things like Anthropic and OpenAI and Google's Gemini and all of those kind of things. We're not bound by those constraints, which means we can experiment a lot more. But to your point, in the manufacturing sector, I'm guessing there's all sorts of Kaizen-based efficiency gains and lean manufacturing efficiency gains that an AI system can surface that would maybe take a human a longer time to crunch those numbers and data and surface those productivity gains. I was just yesterday with a very big warehousing provider in the UK that have just built a purpose-built fulfillment facility, a 3PL facility, a big 1 million square foot shed in the Midlands here in the UK. And these guys are using robotics through 2/3 of the warehouse. There's an enormous amount of what goes in, gets stored and goes back out again that barely touches a human hand. Pallets are moved on automatic forklift trucks. There you have a crane system that puts the pallets away into the racking. So there's no manual forklifts being driven in and around the racking. That's all being done by cranes and robots. And then even their pick and pack area, they have these almost like little circular robots that actually go and pick up shelves of products and drive them to where the pickers are standing. They pick the elements that they need from that, and then the little rack robot goes back to where it needs to go to put that back until it's needed for the next pick. And just to see that level of automation in action, it gives some context. This standing up this warehouse, which was a purpose-built facility, was a 3-year project for about something touching 100 people just to plan the ERP systems and the robotics and the software that runs the robotics. But of course, they're going to get a fairly quick ROI because they really don't need that many humans under the root. They need an engineering team for when things go wrong, and they need some humans for the things that don't naturally fit within the automation systems. But you had a 1 million square foot warehouse where actually only really about 1,000 square foot of that was an area of the warehouse where humans were operating. The rest is all mechanized. So yeah, I think the biggest constraint with AI is the user. If you put crap in, you get crap out. So I'm aware I think a lot of people dabble a little bit with AI and fail. They don't they think the AI is failing them. But usually in my experience, it's the other way around. It's not the AI that's failing. It's their understanding of how to use the AI that's failing.
Exactly.
And we're also seeing other stuff. I work quite closely with a US-based warehouse management systems provider. I'm happy to name them. They're a big name. They're called Deposco. These guys are using AI technology and agents now to surface kind of trends and patterns within retailers' inventories that they may not even know for themselves, that about one SKU blowing up or one slowing down. We're seeing more and more of it. And I think the businesses that aren't at least experimenting in these areas are going to be the ones that in the next 2, 3, 5 years or whatever the timeline is, are the ones that very quickly fall behind their competitors that are experimenting and are investing into these types of systems.
Yeah. And another thing that's changing besides AI, which seems to be getting faster and just mind-blowing what it can do, but global trade also is changing just about every month. So what are a few regulatory or geopolitical shifts that manufacturers should be paying closer attention to over the next year?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, again, President Trump has moved first, let's say. But when we look, for example, at Temu, Shein, AliExpress, and all of these enormous Chinese online companies that are shipping typically quite low value products to consumers around the world, three bodies are now reacting to that. So last year, the big news was Mr. Trump and the tariffs and him trying to level the trade playing field with his America First agenda. We've now seen a similar, and it's been in the planning in Europe for a long time, but just on the 1st of July of this month, this year, the Europeans took a similar approach where they removed their duty-free de minimis. So you can no longer send a product, a low-value parcel consignment to Europe without it attracting a duty surcharge. And even the UK have said they're going to follow suit in a similar direction, but we're a little slower to act than Mr. Trump and the Europeans. So our change isn't actually due to kick in until 2028 or 2029. But Rachel Reeves has said publicly that is under review and likely to be removed. At the moment, if your product is £135, British pounds or less, then you can import into the UK without any customs duty. But that will no longer be the case in a couple of years' time. So I think to your point about what the trend is to try and stem the flow of these cheap Chinese products. So what then becomes the play, if you like, from a manufacturer or a retailer's perspective, is to hold inventory in more than one location. I think the days of having all of your inventory in one place, if you want to trade globally, that is, if you only ever sell to the US consumer, then have all your inventory in the US for sure. But if you have aspirations to sell to consumers or wholesalers in the UK and Europe, then it will commercially make far much more sense to you to have a stock holding in the markets that you intend to serve. And it comes back to that border crossing point. I think we'll see it. The kind of industry term for this is 4PL rather than 3PL. So fourth party logistics. It's working with a warehousing provider or a logistics service provider that can offer you one window into your inventory, but across multiple sites and locations, potentially across multiple geographies. So I think in the old world, and by that I mean 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, most people would hold all of their inventory in one place and serve the rest of the world from that one place. I think that model and that modus operandi now is going to become the minority rather than the majority over time. And obviously it'll take businesses time to adjust their supply chains for that, but we're already seeing it. We provide a service where we help retail brands find suitable warehousing partners, both in the UK and internationally. And we're seeing more and more retailers coming to us saying, and often it's a UK retailer, and they're saying, for years, we've got a big database of customers in the US who order from us regularly, and we ship the parcel to them or the pallet to them from the UK. But we've looked at our numbers and we've looked at our costs, and actually now it makes far more sense for us to have a stock holding in the US and the UK rather than just in the one place. So that's probably the biggest trend that I see with the sort of businesses that we're talking to on a regular basis.
And along those same lines then, for a manufacturer that's growing quickly, when is it time to rethink its logistics strategy instead of just simply trying to do more with the current system? I know you covered that quite a bit in this last part of the conversation, but is there anything else that maybe they can do better?
I think to think of it as a journey rather than a destination, right? And something that you need to keep under review on a very regular basis, because markets change, behaviors change, expectations change. I don't think it's a one and done. I think you've got to have it under constant review, monitor your costs on a regular basis, keep an eye on the regulatory landscapes for the markets that are important to you, and be agile enough to react to those changes when they come in. Usually we get a bit more time to plan. The big supply chain story from the UK and the Europe's perspective was obviously Brexit. What we saw, and I was right at the cold face of Brexit, was lots and lots of retailers and businesses that we traded with. They just, it's worked another day. We'll think about that later on. And then all of a sudden the deadlines arrive. There's this massive reactive scramble. Everybody's getting stuck in customs. And it just, I think if you know something is coming, then plan for it. And yeah, I would say compliance in supply chain is a journey rather than a destination, and something that you need to keep in a fairly kind of constant loop of review.
So as we get to the end of our time together, if you could give every manufacturing leader one piece of advice about building a more resilient supply chain, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it would be to look at what AI can do for your business. Even if you're really skeptical or nervous about using AI systems, you can do things locally without giving you access to systems that are going to get you amazing results. We work with a lot of small businesses here in the UK. Sometimes they're manufacturing businesses, other times they're just retail businesses. And there's a big spectrum, if you like, of AI adoption that we see in the businesses that we talk to. Some are really pushing hard in that area and they're investing in it and they're really up to speed with what's going on. And then others are just dabbling around the edges. But one simple thing that most businesses can do is drop your invoices into a custom GPT or into a Claude project and just get the AI to do the heavy lifting on flagging any unusual looking lines in those invoices or anomalies or whatever. It doesn't need to, you can even anonymize that data before you put it in there. So no company specifics are mentioned. So yeah, I would say if there's one thing to look at for today to leverage as much as you possibly can, I would say to look at where the low hanging fruit is that you can attack in your business with a bit of AI to either increase profitability or to speed something up or remove some friction or a bottleneck. And you can go and pay a consultant a lot of money to do it, or you can just roll your sleeves up and have a little play around with it yourself.
Yep. All right. If someone did want to continue the conversation with you and learn more about you and how ShipMax can help them, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, really simple email to address to remember is just hello@shipmax.co.uk. That's shipmax.co.uk. Feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. I'm Phil Rees at ShipMax. You'll find me that way. I'm quite a big LinkedIn guy. Always happy to receive a connection request or a follow. Do give our company page a follow if you find yourself on LinkedIn, because we do try and regularly post helpful content through that channel. We're starting to build some other social media channels that up until now I've largely ignored just because of hours in the day, but we'll soon be showing up on Instagram and TikTok and on YouTube, I hope, as well. So yeah, do follow our socials. But yeah, for a quick response, just email us at hello@shipmax.co.uk. We answer every email. Not the spammy ones, of course, but every genuine email that comes in through that inbox gets looked at by either myself or my colleague Ridian. And yeah, we'd love to talk to you.
All right, Phil, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks, Lisa.
I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network podcast. If this conversation gave you something to think about, share it with someone else who will get it. And hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next.